welcome to another episode of Keeping London Healthy. My name is Dr. Mario Elia. On the last number of episodes, we've been having guests, whether they be physicians or other health professionals that have given us a great wealth of information about a number of topics. One of the things that we initially started the show with was kind of taking a question and answer approach, addressing questions that I was hearing from patients and family and friends, largely around COVID to start. And that's how we got the show going. And I think we've got a topic that I've heard enough about for the last little bit in the news and talking to patients that I think would be of use, and that's talking about aspartame. And I'm sure a lot of you have heard this about aspartame in the news the last few weeks, about risks of aspartame and whether we should be drinking it or not. So I thought let's actually do a deep dive on this, and so you can hear it from me directly, thoughts on aspartame, and potentially some of you may consume aspartame, whether Diet Cokes or other products. So we'll be talking about that. And spoiler alert, it is safe. You don't have to change your consumption of aspartame. So I'm not going to drag this out for 25 minutes until you get the conclusion. So for those of you who don't have half an hour to watch, it is safe. But for those of you who do want to get a bit more information on the topic, we'll be doing a bit of a deep dive and really arming you with the information to share with friends and family, because ultimately this will come up, and we'll want to give you some bullet points that you can then take to address some of this to reassure those in your life really of the safety. So we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back, and we'll get into the meat of the discussion. All right, welcome back. Again, today we're going to be talking all about aspartame. So a lot of you probably about a week ago would have heard in the news some I'll say kind of alarming headlines, some headlines that kind of caught your eye. A few of them here. So exclusive, WHO's Cancer Research Agency to say aspartame sweetener a possible carcinogen. Another one, what to know about aspartame, the sugar substitute in Diet Coke that will reportedly be declared a possible cancer risk by the WHO. When I saw the first headline, again, about a week ago, we've seen this with aspartame a lot. We'll talk a bit about the history, but my hope was that it wouldn't kind of snowball and for multiple agencies to pick it up and for it to kind of get in the public eye. But lo and behold, within probably 24 hours, it was absolutely everywhere, and everyone had certainly heard about this possible risk. And even talking to patients and friends and family since then, it's come up completely in conversation about completely different things. Like, oh, by the way, like someone grabbing a Diet Coke at a dinner party and saying, oh, didn't you hear that thing caused cancer? And I roll my eyes and have a half an hour conversation with them about why it doesn't. But again, it seems to have permeated conversation. So again, we're going to talk today about aspartame and give you some information that, again, you guys can take into conversations yourselves. So what is aspartame? Let's start there. So aspartame is essentially a non-calorie artificial sweetener. It's a dipeptide, so 2 amino acids that are held together by a peptide bond and kind of created artificially. It was initially first created in 1981. So it's been around for, do the math there, 40 plus years. And the one thing we know for sure is that aspartame does not increase blood sugar or insulin levels. Again, bullet point number one, that's never been up for debate. It doesn't increase blood sugar. It doesn't increase insulin levels. And that's part of the reason why it's been so attractive for many years. Obviously, we know and this is well established, that the harms of sugar, right? No debate around it. Sugar increases the risk of cancer, increases the risk of heart disease, increases the risk of diabetes. So sugar does all of those things, and that is not up for debate, and we know the risks of that. So low calorie artificial sweeteners like aspartame and sucralose and saccharin, all of these things, all these artificial sweeteners have played a role in our food supply for decades now. And aspartame specifically, you will see in products like Diet Coke, and then Coke Zero and all the Coke products, Trident gum, Crystal Light, sugar-free Jello, and the aspartame itself, you'll see marketed as Equal and NutraSweet. Those are kind of brand names for aspartame. So the one thing I'll address and it's really important for us to know, you know, artificial, when we talk about artificial sweetener, the alternative, you know, natural, does not necessarily mean better, right? So when we talk about an artificial sweetener, and people automatically assume, well, natural sugar must be good for you, and because it's natural, that's entirely false. And artificial things aren't necessarily harmful just by them being artificial. And again, we talked about what we know about the harms of sugar that we know. So claims about aspartame and their harms have really been around as long as aspartame's been around, going back 40 years when it initially came out. So aspartame there were initially false claims around it causing MS, which were long disproven, links to heart disease. There were chain letters, you know, when we talk about, you know, how quickly things spread on social media. Way back when, people used to have chain letters that they would literally write on paper and send to other people. And one of the hoaxes out there for years was the harms of aspartame causing MS. That goes back many years. So aspartame has been studied for many years. There's been literally hundreds of trials on aspartame, observational studies on hundreds of thousands of people. And the consensus that both the FDA, so the Food and Drug Administration in the US, and Health Canada, and the WHO, and multiple other organizations around the world have come to is that the safe level of aspartame is 40 milligrams per kilogram. So what does that mean? That means that an adult who weighs 150 pounds would have to ingest more than 14 cans of Diet Coke per day. That's how much would be in a Diet Coke to experience the negative health consequences of aspartame. Okay, and that's been that's been the opinion of those organizations for a number of years now. So 14 cans. Okay, full disclosure, I do drink Diet Coke myself. Even in an aggressive Diet Coke day, I don't think I've ever topped 3. So 14, again, unless you're really consuming this stuff, it doesn't get to a harmful level. And what is this based on? So again, aspartame has been studied again for many years, like I've said. So we have multiple trials, one from 2012 from a study called the Nurses Health Study that looked at over 100,000 people and found that it did not, aspartame intake did not increase risk of lymphoma, myeloma, leukemias, or other cancers. Yet another study of that same group looked at pancreatic cancer, no increased risk. Another paper from 2014, no effect. And there was actually a big systematic review that was done in 2023 that looked at dozens of large studies. So again, now we're looking at millions of patients in this group. And they found that very little evidence that aspartame and other sweeteners increase the risk of cancer. So again, reassuring data. But again, we don't want to discount new studies that come out, right? Because we have a vested interest in finding out the truth behind a product, not necessarily just that, well, there's a few studies that have shown it. Again, as an avid drinker of Diet Coke myself, I would like to know whether it's harmful or not. So I appreciate the fact that they're still doing trials on it. A study that was published in 2022 is likely what has kind of triggered this recent review, and we're going to talk about like what the WHO has done and what that means. But we'll look at the study that a lot of us think they've changed their views on. So this was called the Nutrinet study back in 2022. They looked at over 100,000 people from France from 2009 to 2021, and checked to see. It was essentially a survey study where people were surveyed as to how much aspartame and other sweeteners they consumed over a period of time. And then they looked at what their health outcomes were. They looked at a number of other kind of health-related outcomes. They looked at their age and their weight and whether they smoked and a few other family history as well. Then they looked at whether they could make any connections between aspartame intake and these negative health outcomes. And what they found, again, observational study, we're going to talk about the significant limitations to this study in a second. But what they found was the rate of cancer in the no aspartame group was 31 per 1,000. And the rate in the group who consumed aspartame was 33 per 1,000. That's over 12 years of the study. So essentially, the increased risk of cancer by 0.2%. Okay, so even if we assume this study is definitive, you can take what it's saying at complete face value and that it's 100% true, That's the increased risk of cancer from aspartame, 0.2%. Now, there's a big problem with these studies, of course. So survey studies are notoriously difficult to actually put into actual practice. Why? Yes, they're doing it as they go along, but if any of you who've ever tried to fill out kind of an ongoing survey as to what you're taking in, like even if you've done like if you're tracking your own calories, for instance, right, and you've got an app that tracks your own calories, how accurate are you in tracking the amounts that you're taking in, the weight of what you're taking in? Did you forget for a meal, for a couple, and then you're going back and trying to remember? So survey data, we always have to take with a grain of salt. Number two, there's always residual confounders with these studies. So they do their best to try to account for things that they think increase risk of cancer, smoking, obesity, whatnot. But when we talk about residual confounders, people who do certain things often have other things that are driving them to do certain things. Meaning, if someone has a weight issue or a family history that they're concerned about, and they're trying to lose weight, and part of that is potentially having artificial sweeteners instead of regular pop, their weight will look normal, but they're not starting from a normal weight because they're already doing a behavior that that led them to lose weight. So it will look like that group who is consuming artificial sweeteners is higher risk, but it's because they were the higher risk group to begin with, if that makes sense. So again, these are residual confounders that we can't necessarily use observational data, meaning looking at what people are doing because what they're doing it for whatever reason they're doing it, and leading it to a conclusion, versus the ultimate way of looking at does something cause a harm is what we call a randomized control trial, where we literally tell people you have to do this, you can't do this, we're going to randomize the groups, you're not going to know which group you're doing, and then we look at what that does in terms of cancer risk. It's very difficult to do that with aspartame or tobacco, which many years ago we had to figure out whether that caused cancer, and alcohol. It's difficult to do randomized control trials prospectively of these. But the other alternative is we take observational studies, and we don't rely just on one of them, but we take multiple observational studies, which is what we've done for aspartame over the years. And that's where the FDA and Health Canada have based their numbers on, is these multiple studies over time that looks like it doesn't actually increase risk of cancer. So this new study, again, interesting, we can't just completely discount it. It has to be incorporated into other studies we have, but we don't automatically ignore everything that's come before it and just focus this on this one new one that happens to show a risk, because that really does bias things in favor of this study. Just because something's the newest one, we can't just take it. Okay, so that new study is, I think, what they're basing it on. So what is the actual news? So this group called the International Agency for Research on Cancer, so it's the IARC, or is the acronym. So this is a body within the World Health Organization, and this is a group that has been tasked with looking at, are things potentially cancer causing? Are things cancer causing? Are they not? And this is a group that's been around for some time. So the headline is that this body, the IARC, is preparing to declare aspartame a Class 2B carcinogen. Well, like alarming headlines, carcinogen. What does this mean? So let's look at what this actually means. So they break things down into different classifications. So a Class 1 carcinogen is something that causes cancer. Okay. Class 2A is something that probably causes cancer. A Class 2B is something that possibly causes cancer. And Class 3 is something that's unclassifiable as a cancer risk. Okay, so again, they're looking at reclassifying aspartame as a Class 2B, which would be possibly causes cancer. Okay, let's look back at the Class 1, causes cancer. What are some things that they've labeled as causing cancer? So arsenic, asbestos, HCV, so hepatitis C. There's a whole list of things. But what else? Processed meat is a Class 1 carcinogen, according to the IARC. Okay, some of you eat processed meats on a regular basis, right? That according to the IARC, that's a Class 1, definitely causes cancer carcinogen. What about alcohol? Alcohol in any amount is a Class 1 carcinogen, according to the IARC. Okay, tobacco, also class 1. So again, we're looking at 2B is where they're looking at putting aspartame into, and we have class 1 carcinogens, which again, many of you consume on a daily basis. So again, just putting things in perspective, kind of where along the pecking order they're putting it. And again, they're not tasked with looking at what magnitude is safe and what magnitude of harm you have. Because again, class 1, processed meat and plutonium are both class 1 carcinogens. Okay. Different levels of concern with exposure based on that. Okay. Now, class 2B, what are some other class 2B carcinogens? Okay. Aloe vera. Okay, they consider topical aloe vera to be a class 2B carcinogen. I personally am not worried about putting aloe vera on my skin. Many of you do. But again, the level of the possibly causing cancer threshold, they consider aloe vera to meet that threshold. Okay, working in the textiles industry, using coconut oil soaps, contact to nickel. Like, so these are things that we have to put it in perspective. Like, how concerned are we about doing these things? Because again, it's the magnitude of the effect that we need to be thinking about. Again, alcohol, we talked about being a class 1. We know that alcohol in any amount is probably harmful. There's been talk over the years about, does 2 drinks a day benefit compared to 0? The more we've researched this over time, there's probably not a safe level of alcohol consumption. So again, if you're suddenly throwing your Diet Cokes away because of your level of concern, I suggest that your bottles of wine and beer should be following them in the trash if you're for that concerned. There is one side effect to aspartame that there's really no debate around, and it is risk of headaches. So certainly if you're someone who does experience headaches and you are a regular consumer of aspartame, that might be something you actually do want to consider cutting out, because we know there is certainly some risk of aspartame from that. All of this aspartame stuff, we talked about going back to the 80s and the concern being ongoing. It kind of got reignited a few years ago. There was a study from this organization called the Ramazzini Institute in the US, where they fed rats basically their entire body weight of aspartame for a regular period of time. And these rats developed these horrific tumors. And some of you may have seen these images about these rats that have gotten this aspartame. They have tumors all over them. But again, the dose makes the poison. So if each of us were to consume our entire body weight in aspartame for many years, we'd probably not be well. And I would be concerned, because we shouldn't be consuming anything in that amount. But again, that's where a lot of the concern about aspartame kind of got reignited, was from this study. So bottom line, this is all kind of very confusing for consumers, right? You see these headlines initially about aspartame and the carcinogens, and they don't put this in the perspective like we just did with, what is a class 1, what is a class 2A, what is a class 2B, and then you see the politics of this, right? Where some countries saying, yeah, we're going to put laws in place based on this, which isn't even an announcement yet, that we're going to ban aspartame. You get other countries saying that no, it is safe. We're going to kind of reinforce our commitment to our current levels of safe aspartame. So again, the politics get involved in this. Some of there is talk that this organization within the WHO, the IARC, some of the members of this do have kind of longstanding connections to some legal organizations, because once something gets relabeled as a possible carcinogen, in some countries in the world that are more litigious than others, lawyers like to get involved and start to file class action lawsuits. This happened with Roundup and Monsanto, where this kind of label being put on something is very attractive for lawyers and to pursue. So again, some links to some people on this committee, to some legal organizations. Some top scientists on this organization, on this group, have long been convinced of the harms of aspartame. They've written letters. They've been linked to environmental groups that have been opposed to aspartame. So they all have their kind of claws into getting this relabeled. And again, this group doesn't look at the actual magnitude of the risk. That's a separate group within the WHO that does this. So again, there's already overlap of kind of who's doing what within the WHO, which is kind of confusing to people. The main thing, again, we touched on this earlier, is that it's not for the average consumer, people who drink Diet Coke or Coke Zero or any aspartame product, it's often not an and or, right? So like the biggest concern I have about these kind of headlines is that people will see this and say, well, see, I told you that Diet Coke was bad for you all along. I was right drinking my regular Coke because it didn't have this other stuff in it. And that is the worst possible thing we could take from this, because as I've talked about before, with the safety of aspartame, that's one thing. But to switch then from aspartame containing products back to sugar products is we know what risk that will carry. So the safest thing to consume is, of course, water. There's no doubt about the safety, the cost. So if all other things be equal, that someone is content drinking water as their main beverage, perfect. There's no doubt about that, because we know there's no risk to drinking reasonable amounts of water. But if someone, whether it's with they're having it at a party or with a meal, or they just like drinking it, and that's what they're consuming because they've made that choice that they want a beverage that tastes sweet. Well, then if the choice is between regular pop and diet pop, there's no doubt, and there should never be a doubt, and there hasn't been any doubt to this date. So regular pop, there's no really excuse to be drinking that in any amount. There's no safe amount to drink. And again, what we know about diet pops is that in moderation, they don't carry significant risk to your health. Again, as someone who consumes it on a regular basis, if I thought it was unsafe, I would be telling you guys very clearly. That's all I've got on aspartame. We're going to take a quick break and come right back after this message. All right, welcome back. Again, we're going to quickly review a few of those bullet points that, again, you guys can use in conversations with people about aspartame. So again, number one, aspartame does not increase blood sugar or insulin levels. Number two, multiple studies to date have not shown any link between aspartame and cancer. And this is a new study that is no more important than the studies that have come before it, showing potentially a slightly increased risk. And we need to consider that in the overall context. Number three, switching to regular pop or to regular sugar instead of these artificial sweeteners will carry significant harm and should not be done. Water is the safest drink possible, and all other things being equal, should be your beverage of choice if we're looking for zero risk. All right. So again, hopefully you guys can take some of that information and share it with others. One quick other thing I wanted to address, it's been in the news lately as well, with, of course, the wildfires and the concern about air quality. We've gotten some helpful guidance from our local health unit in terms of kind of what we should do, when we should be outside. And I just wanted to kind of reinforce some of the messaging from the health unit. Especially people with underlying medical conditions. So whether that's underlying asthma, COPD, underlying heart failure, anything that we would consider kind of an underlying medical condition. If the health unit is putting out these guidances, even if someone feels fine outside when they go, really we should be following the health unit's advice. I've got patients who, again, feel fine most of the time, and when it's even a humid day, they'll go from zero symptoms to needing hospitalization because of an asthma attack pretty quick. So again, it's really important to follow the health unit's guidance on this. Obviously we didn't get to the point of having to wear masks outside, and we never got that advice. But even the advice about kids not being being able to play outside for sports, I know some parents were frustrated about that and thought, are we overreacting? But really, overabundance of I think an abundance of caution was probably warranted in that situation, given that some kids with mild underlying asthma wanted to go to soccer practice would go and get pretty sick. So it was certainly inconvenient, but again, health unit was probably reasonable in that, and hopefully we don't see too many more of those kind of air quality days that we have to deal with. So Again, until next time, stay healthy.